Okay, hello everybody, this is Nick Dutch here. I just wanted to go into a few things because some people out there are still rather confused with definitions and all the rest of that. So I've looked up a particular word here. It's one you may have heard of before, okay? It is unempirical. This is the word used in Aleister Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice to define what he regarded as being the magic of tradition. As opposed to that which was normal life, being and doing. But he did want to try and breathe some form of empirical thought into the subject of the unempirical magic of tradition. Now, a definition of unempirical, which has come out here, is adjective, it's a descriptive word, and it says here, not empirical. Obviously, not necessarily very helpful, because we'd have to look up the word empirical to understand what empirical means. But in this particular case, it's suggesting that unempirical means derived from theory rather than experiments. Okay? So that means that when you start to put an experimental component into, in this particular case, the magic of tradition, you're then moving towards the subject of the empirical rather than the unempirical. But that is, of course, a question of degree. Okay? If unempirical means derived from theory, then essentially that would refer to, in the case of occultism, in the case of magic and all that kind of thing, something along the lines of speculation or indeed jumping to conclusions. Also the issue or subject of belief. So there are some ways in which magic will always remain well, one would say hypothetical rather than theoretical, maybe, in this particular context. Alright, we can assume that the word theory in this particular web page is being used in a very loose term, or in a very loose way. Now let's switch over to another one here, just to reinforce the main message. Okay, unempirically means not empirically, without experiment or experience. So in this particular definition, okay, see if I can blow that up, because obviously I'm doing this off on a screen recording bit of software which might be a little dodgy, who knows. Without experiment or experience. So when you're actually doing things in an experimental manner, and by that I'm interpreting it as applying rational thought to the nature of the experiment and experience that you're putting yourself through, again you're moving away from the unempirical. Okay? But also we got to be able to separate the idea of positivistic from anti-positivistic, and to think in greater detail about our standards of truth or proof. Remember that some people would regard their experiences to be pure proof or pure proof positive. Now you can have your experience, again that's moving away from something which is unempirical, alright, but it's not completely positivistic. The natural sciences are by their very nature positivistic, okay, but we have experiences and we try and understand them. And for those who haven't had the experiences, they try and gain them, often in a misguided way, because they're listening to people who have more beliefs or their own personal theories, when expressed colloquially, okay, going back to the idea of theory, rather than necessarily in-depth analytical thought on the subject of what it is that they're dealing with and talking about. So there are issues, but what we have seen here within this demonstration is that despite the fact that Aleister Crowley called magic unempirical, the actions that the transdeist or experimental occultist is doing is not necessarily strictly under the classification of the unempirical. And therefore we would have to try and use another word to describe what we are doing. And we might want to use the phrase unpositivistic or non-positivistic. I haven't actually tried a search on unpositivistic before. So let's give it a go. Okay, let's wait for my rapid computer to do its work. No, it hasn't actually come out as a word. No, but we can actually have a look at what a positivist is, and therefore we can extrapolate from that what non-positivistic would be. A follower of positivism. By far the most popular idea is the positivist one, that we should keep only the facts. So, if positivism actually means that we should keep only the facts, and experiences themselves are facts because they happen, there could actually be a positivistic aspect to the magic of tradition. Why was it that Aleister Crowley actually called magic unempirical, if it doesn't snugly fit the definition? Positivism, a strong form of empiricism, especially as established in the philosophical system of Augustin Comte, that rejects metaphysics and theology as seeking knowledge beyond the scope of experience, and holds that experimental investigation and observation are the only sources of substantial knowledge. Well, is the experimental occultist necessarily metaphysical? Is the experimental occultist necessarily theological? Not really. The experimental occultist might use theological ideas for the purposes of trying to create some kind of alteration to the mind, but wouldn't necessarily have a theistic, and of course the word theist is where we get the word theology, or vice versa, okay, a theistic interpretation of some kind of spiritual force. So essentially, experimental occultists are non-theological. To the most part, we may have our own religious interpretations, we keep those to ourselves and try and separate that from our objective understanding of the way that the world is actually working. And as far as metaphysical is concerned, sure, we can have some strange experiences which might give us some beliefs, but all we can do is have a look at the experiences. Next, the other issue I'd raise is experimental investigation. Well, you do your experiment. I mean, when I did my Angel of Death invocation experiments, that was a real experiment. Okay, I wanted to find out what was going to happen, and so I did it, and some strange stuff happened. So I performed an experiment. Alright, is it necessarily within the scope or methodology of the same kind of experiment that you would do if you were to establish whether penicillin really does kill certain kinds of bacteria? Well, I suppose the answer would have to be no, because you're dealing with a different form of natural phenomena. But the fact remains, it was an experiment. And I've tried similar experiments under different circumstances, trying to evaluate what kind of things was actually causing the actual results, and I stumbled upon the idea that it was based upon all the states of consciousness and forms of suggestion, and that particular interpretation seems to effectively stand up to perpetual experience over time. So, magic of tradition, the occult magic of tradition, is starting to look more like a positivistic science in some ways, not necessarily in the same ways, but in some ways, okay? Let's have a look at this. This is getting quite excited. I haven't actually, this is a non-rehearsed video. I'm just doing this. I'm just seeing what's out there on the dictionaries, and this is what we've got. Okay, experimental investigation and observation. When you're doing something experimental occult orientated, you tend to look closely at what you've experienced, thoughts, feelings, moods, and so on and so forth, and then you start to get, start to be able to build up an understanding of the way the world works. So you do use your observation rather a lot, and the observation seems to bring about clarity of thought about various different issues, and maybe gives you more understanding as to what is actually real. So, So if we're not unempirical, and we don't necessarily completely fit the definition of non-positivistic, what are we? Well, I guess we're people who are trying to come closer to the truth and trying to find ways of doing it on the basis of strange experiences that we've had, so that we can gain sources of substantial knowledge through experience. So, at the end of this video, like right about now, I feel like asking, are we really unpositivistic? Are we really unempirical? And by reason, no, we're not. We're seekers of substantial knowledge on the basis of experience, and therefore what we do as experimental occultists overlaps with science. Nick Dutch, out.